He said I wasn't his type. Not pretty enough. Not interesting enough. Not his kind of girl. And the way he said it made sure it stayed burned into my memory. I laughed it off, pretended it didn't sting, but deep down, something shattered. That night, I promised myself, one day, I'd make him remember me, in ways he'd never forget. Years passed, silence, distance, transformation, until fate brought us face to face again, and this time, he was the one staring in disbelief. Funny, isn't it? How the people who once made you feel invisible suddenly can't take their eyes off you. But this story isn't just about looks. It's about power, pain, and poetic justice. But before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to the Revenge by Sophia channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. The evening air was soft and golden, the sun melting into orange clouds above the school courtyard. She stood beneath the old oak tree, hands trembling, voice caught somewhere between fear and hope. He was leaning against the brick wall, phone in hand, smirking the way only he could, careless and charming. For days, she had rehearsed this moment in front of the mirror, whispering the words she was about to say. Her heart raced as she finally spoke. I like you. I've liked you for a long time. For a second, silence hung between them, heavy, uncertain, beautiful. She searched his face for any flicker of kindness, any sign that her courage wasn't a mistake. But what she got instead was laughter. Not soft laughter, the cruel kind that cuts. He looked her up and down and said, "You're not my type." The words hit harder than any slap, echoing in her chest as he turned away. And as the sun faded behind her, something else faded too. The last bit of light she had left for herself. The next morning, whispers followed her through the school halls. She could hear her name being passed around like a secret. She actually told him. He said she wasn't his type. Can you believe she even tried? The laughter was everywhere, invisible but piercing. She kept her eyes low, clutching her books tighter, pretending not to hear. But every step felt heavier, every glance felt like a dagger. He passed her in the hallway that day, surrounded by friends, still smiling. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes said enough. Superiority, mockery, amusement. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and never return. For the first time, she felt small, fragile, and painfully human. That night, she sat in front of the mirror again, the same mirror where she'd once practiced her confession. Only now, the girl staring back didn't look like her anymore. Her reflection was quieter, colder, broken, and for the first time she wondered, what if he was right? Days turned into weeks, and the laughter slowly faded, but the memory didn't. It lived inside her, buried deep like a thorn that refused to come out. She stopped talking much, avoided crowds, and spent lunches alone by the window. But every now and then, she'd catch sight of him, his voice echoing, his smile effortless, his charm untouched by what he'd done one evening. As rain whispered against her window, she sat on her bed staring at her phone. She scrolled through pictures of him, the ones she couldn't bring herself to delete. Her thumb hovered over the screen, her heart pounding, torn between anger and sadness. Then suddenly she pressed delete. Every picture, every message. Gone. The thunder outside cracked like a warning. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass and whispered, "Never again." That was the night something changed inside her. Not a scream, not a tear. Just a quiet promise, a promise the world would one day regret underestimating. The days after the rejection felt endless, a blur of murmurs and eyes that followed her everywhere. It was as if the whole town had joined in on the joke. In the cafeteria, whispers floated over trays, and laughter seemed to echo louder when she entered. She could feel the weight of their stares, heavy, mocking, pitying. Even her friends had begun to drift away, afraid that standing beside her would make them a target too. Sometimes she'd hear fragments of his voice in the crowd, low, confident, careless. "She actually thought I'd date her," he'd say, and the laughter that followed was sharp enough to cut skin. Each word sliced through her, but she kept walking, pretending she didn't care. Pretending was the only shield she had left. At night, when the world went quiet, she'd replay every word in her head, over and over, until even silence sounded cruel. The noise didn't stop. It just moved inside her. She started avoiding everyone, walking the long way home, sitting in the back of class, keeping her headphones in even when no music played. Her parents noticed, but she brushed off their concern with forced smiles. "I'm fine," she'd whisper, even though her voice trembled each time. But she wasn't fine. She was disappearing, and piece by piece. Her laughter, her dreams, her confidence, all fading like ink left in the rain. The world felt colder, sharper, darker. Every mirror she passed reminded her of what he said. "You're not my type." Sometimes, she'd stand in front of that same oak tree, the one where it all started, and stare at the ground, wondering how something so innocent could turn into something that haunted her nights. And then one day, standing there in the pale gray light, she whispered to herself, "Maybe it's time to leave." A thought that started as a whisper began to grow louder. That night she couldn't sleep. The wind outside howled like it carried her name, pushing her toward something unknown. She sat by the window, looking out at the empty street, feeling both scared and strangely calm. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to think about change. Real change. The kind that burns bridges and rebuilds souls. She took out a small suitcase from under her bed and began packing. Not much. Just what mattered. A few clothes, a journal, and a photo of herself before everything fell apart. Her hands shook as she zipped it shut. It felt final. It felt terrifying. But it also felt right. Before leaving her room, she turned one last time to the mirror. The girl staring back at her looked lost, but there was a spark. Faint, trembling, alive. She whispered, "You'll come back stronger." And as she walked into the night, under the dim flicker of the streetlights, the rain began to fall, soft, steady, like a quiet applause from the universe. Somewhere in the distance, a new life was waiting. But she had no idea. It would also lead her straight back to him. The night she left, the city was wrapped in fog, the kind that swallowed streetlights whole and made even familiar roads look foreign. Her suitcase wheels clacked softly on the wet pavement as she made her way to the bus station. No one knew she was leaving. No goodbye messages, no explanations, just silence. She sat by the window on the last seat of the midnight bus, watching the world blur past. Every raindrop racing down the glass felt like a piece of her old life slipping away. Her phone buzzed once, a message from her mother asking when she'd be home. She stared at it for a long time, then turned the screen off. She couldn't explain, not yet. As the bus engine growled and the city lights disappeared behind her, she took one final breath and whispered to herself, "That version of me is gone." But deep down, she wondered, who was she going to become next? The city she arrived in was colder, louder, yet somehow freeing. Skyscrapers towered above her like giants, and the air smelled of ambition and rain. The first few nights were hard. She stayed in a tiny rented room with flickering lights and a bed that creaked with every turn. But the silence here was different. It wasn't filled with mockery or judgment. It was empty, waiting to be rebuilt. Each morning she explored the city, small cafes, crowded subways, neon signs reflected in puddles. No one knew her name here, no one remembered her humiliation. For the first time, anonymity felt like luxury. She started working small jobs, saving every coin, and spending her evenings reading books about confidence and self-worth. Slowly, she began to write again, in that old journal she had packed. Not about pain, but about possibility. And one night, while writing, she looked up and realized something strange. The girl who once wanted to disappear was beginning to want more. It began subtly. A walk at sunrise instead of sleeping in. A healthy meal instead of skipped dinners. A smile in the mirror, hesitant but real. She started going to a small gym around the corner, and the trainer there, an older woman with kind eyes, told her, Don't chase perfection. Chase peace. That sentence stayed with her like a mantra. Weeks turned into months. Sweat replaced tears. Books replaced gossip. Solitude became her teacher. Each night she stood in front of the mirror and whispered small promises to herself. You are enough. You will be stronger. You are not broken. And day by day, the girl who left her hometown a ghost began to glow from within. But transformation always has a price. Because as she built her new life, brick by brick, fate was already setting the stage for an encounter she never saw coming. The moment her past would walk right back into her perfect new world. Mornings came earlier now. The alarm rang before dawn, and instead of rolling back under the sheets, she'd rise, quiet, determined. The air outside was cold, sharp enough to sting her skin, but she liked it. It reminded her that she was alive, that she was still moving. She ran through the empty streets, the sound of her footsteps echoing between the buildings like a heartbeat, strong, steady, relentless. At first, she struggled. Her body ached, her lungs burned, and her doubts whispered cruelly in her ear. You'll never change. You're still that same girl. But she didn't stop. Every drop of sweat felt like shedding the past, the fear, the humiliation, the rejection. Slowly, her reflection began to change. Not just her face, but her eyes. They looked steadier, brighter. Each morning she pushed harder, whispering to herself, You were broken once. But not anymore. And with every breath, the girl who had once begged for approval began learning how to live without needing it. Physical strength was easy to measure, but healing the inside was far more difficult. She began going to therapy sessions offered at a nearby community center. At first, she didn't speak much. She'd sit quietly as others shared their pain, their heartbreaks, their shame. But one day, when the counselor asked what brought her there, she finally said it. Someone made me feel like I wasn't enough. It was simple, but the weight behind it nearly cracked her voice. The counselor nodded, saying softly, And now? She thought for a long moment before answering, Now I want to prove I am. That sentence changed everything. Slowly, she began facing her memories, not to relive them, but to rewrite them. She learned that healing wasn't forgetting. It was forgiving herself for believing the lies. And every time she left that room, her heart felt a little lighter, as if a chain had quietly fallen away. But somewhere deep inside, she could still feel the shadow of his laughter. Waiting. Months turned into years. Her job turned into a career. Her confidence turned into quiet power. The people around her saw it. The way she walked, the way she spoke. Even strangers noticed. There was something magnetic about her now. Not arrogance, but assurance. The kind that only comes from surviving what should have broken you. Her wardrobe changed. Her style sharpened. Her posture lifted. But it wasn't vanity. It was reclamation. Each choice, each look, each word she spoke was hers, finally hers. When she smiled now, it wasn't to please. It was to declare that she no longer needed anyone's permission to shine. One evening, while standing before the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The girl who once cried herself to sleep had vanished. In her place stood a woman, calm, confident, and untouchable. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, If he could see me now. But the thought that followed chilled her heart. What if one day he actually does? It started quietly. A promotion at work, a recognition email, a project that suddenly made her name circulate among people who once overlooked her. She didn't chase the spotlight, yet somehow it found her. The same hands that once trembled while sending out job applications now wrote confident emails and made decisions others depended on. Her voice, once fragile, now carried weight in every meeting. Her evenings were filled with warm light, candles, music, notebooks filled with plans. She smiled more often now, not because life was perfect, but because she could finally breathe. Every little victory felt sacred, proof that she had rebuilt herself from the ruins they left behind. But late at night, when her phone buzzed with compliments and messages, she'd sometimes pause and wonder, Is this really happiness? Or just the armor I built to hide the scars? Months passed, and her glow became impossible to ignore. Strangers complimented her. Colleagues admired her. Old acquaintances who had once mocked her sent friend requests and heart emojis under her photos. It was strange, seeing the same people who used to whisper about her now begging for her attention. Her transformation wasn't just physical, it was in the way she carried herself. The quiet confidence, the way her eyes met others without fear, the soft smile that said, "I know who I am now." She'd walk through the city and feel it, the shift in the air, the silent recognition. Yet, among all those admiring eyes, she sometimes caught herself scanning faces unconsciously, as if searching for his. And when she didn't find him, a part of her felt both relief and disappointment, because deep down, she knew. Seeing her like this would burn him alive. One evening, after a long day, she stood before her mirror again. The same ritual, but a different reflection. The soft light outlined the edges of her face, highlighting the calm strength that time had carved into her. She brushed her hair back, her eyes steady, almost daring the reflection to doubt her again. But it didn't. It just stared back, proud, unbroken. She remembered the girl who once whispered, "Never again," through tears. She remembered the laughter, the pain, the empty nights. And now, standing there, she realized she had kept her promise. She had become stronger. But as thunder rumbled in the distance, a strange unease crept in. Because for the first time in years, she received a message, an old name lighting up her screen, one she thought she'd never see again. Her breath caught. Her fingers hovered over the phone, and the world, once so peaceful, suddenly felt fragile again. It had been years since she left her hometown, but fate, cruel, poetic fate, always finds a way to circle back. Her company had organized an event in the very city she once ran from. As the car approached the familiar streets, memories clawed their way up from the depths of her mind. The laughter, the humiliation, the heartbreak. Everything she'd buried came rushing back, carried on the wind like whispers from ghosts. She checked into the hotel that overlooked the same skyline she'd once watched while dreaming of escape. The air smelled of rain again, just like that night she'd left. Only now she wasn't the same. She was no longer the girl who begged to be seen. She was the woman people turned to notice, and yet, as she stood by the window, staring at the distant school she once called hell, her chest tightened. She whispered to herself, "This time, I won't run." But somewhere deep down, a question lingered. What if he's still here? The evening of the event shimmered with golden lights and quiet music. She walked into the ballroom wearing confidence like armor. Her presence turned heads instantly. Conversations paused. Glasses clinked softly. For a moment, she felt invincible, until she heard it. That voice. Low, familiar, and all too real. Her pulse froze. She turned slowly, and there he was. Older now, sharper, but unmistakably him. The man who had once crushed her spirit with a smirk. He was staring at her. Not with arrogance this time, but disbelief. His eyes flickered with confusion, recognition, and something dangerously close to regret. He took a hesitant step forward, his lips parting like he wanted to speak. She didn't move. She just held his gaze, calm, cold, untouchable. The silence between them roared louder than any insult he'd ever thrown. And in that silence, he realized he was no longer in control. He approached her slowly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I know you, don't I?" he asked, his voice softer now, unsure. She tilted her head, watching him struggle to piece together who she had become. For a moment, she let him drown in confusion. Then, with a quiet, almost amused tone, she replied, "You used to." Something shifted in his face. The exact moment recognition hit. His eyes widened, his breath caught. "It's you," he whispered, as if saying her name might burn his tongue. She smiled, not cruelly but knowingly. "Funny," she said softly. "I thought I wasn't your type." The color drained from his face. Around them, the music played on, but neither of them heard it. He stood frozen. the weight of years crashing down. And as she turned away, her heels clicking against the marble floor, he finally understood what true regret sounded like. Silence. But for her, it was only the beginning of his unraveling. After that night, she thought it was over, that the look on his face would be enough. But men like him don't surrender easily. The next morning, as she scrolled through her notifications, she noticed a new follower. His name. A chill crept through her chest. He had found her. Days passed, and his presence began to slip into her digital life. A like here, a comment there. Subtle, deliberate. He was testing the waters, like a hunter circling prey he once believed too weak to fight back. She ignored him at first, treating his name on her screen like a ghost, visible but powerless. Yet at night she caught herself wondering what he wanted. An apology? Redemption? Another chance to play the same cruel game? But this time the rules had changed, and she wasn't the one being watched. He was. It started innocently. Or so it seemed. "Hey, long time." She stared at the message for a full minute before locking her phone. The next day, another one came. "You've changed." In a good way, each word was a reminder of the past, disguised as a compliment. He wanted her attention again, wanted her to respond, but she didn't. She left his messages unopened, unanswered, unread. The silence was her weapon now. Days turned into weeks, and his messages grew more desperate. "I miss our talks. Can we just catch up?" "Please, I just want to explain." "Explain what?" The way he broke her. The way he laughed as she fell apart. She smiled quietly to herself. He was trapped now, not by her words, but by his own regret. And the irony was delicious. When silence didn't work in his favor, he turned restless. He began asking mutual friends about her, pretending curiosity when it was clearly obsession. His posts suddenly mirrored hers, the same quotes, the same places, the same mood. He was chasing her ghost, trying to catch up to the version of her he'd once destroyed, but she watched it unfold with quiet satisfaction. Every move he made, every attempt to reclaim her attention, only reminded her how small he'd become. He had once been the one who decided who was enough. Now he was the one begging to be seen. Late one evening, she opened her messages and saw his latest one. "I still think about that day." She typed a reply, paused, then deleted it. Her finger hovered for a moment before she blocked him completely. No anger, no drama, just peace. And as she closed her phone, she whispered, "Let him wonder." Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't destroying someone, it's living in a way they can never reach again. Weeks went by. For the first time, he was the one waiting for a reply that never came. His phone sat heavy in his hand, screen glowing in the dark like a wound that wouldn't close. Every time he refreshed his messages, the emptiness stared back, a silence colder than any insult. He started scrolling through her profile, hoping to catch glimpses of her life. But it wasn't the same anymore. She looked untouchable now, confident, free. Every photo, every word felt like a wall he could never climb. He zoomed in on her smile, trying to find a trace of the girl who once trembled in his presence. But she was gone, buried beneath her new strength. At night, he'd lie awake, hearing her voice in his head, soft but final. Let him wonder, and wonder he did, about the moment everything turned, about the power she'd quietly taken back. He stopped meeting people, stopped talking. Even the mirror became unbearable. His reflection seemed to mock him, eyes hollow, lips dry, hair a tangled mess of regret. He'd run his fingers through it, muttering to himself, "I didn't mean to." It wasn't supposed to end like this. The guilt he'd buried for years had begun to rot from the inside. Memories returned like ghosts, her tears, her voice breaking, his laughter echoing in that cruel moment. Now, in the silence of his empty apartment, he was the one haunted. He opened his old messages, scrolling through them one by one. The insults, the mockery, the manipulation. Each word hit harder now that the roles had reversed. What once gave him power now poisoned him. Then, one night, he typed again, "I'm sorry." But he never pressed send. because deep down he knew. She didn't need his apology anymore. While he unraveled, she flourished quietly. Her nights were filled with laughter again, her mornings with peace. She didn't post about revenge, didn't speak his name, because power, when real, doesn't need to announce itself. Meanwhile, he began seeing her everywhere, in strangers on the street, in songs on the radio, in dreams that turned into nightmares. She was the shadow behind his thoughts, the reminder that some ghosts don't haunt to hurt. They haunt to teach. He started avoiding mirrors completely now. Every reflection carried her silence, her unspoken, "I won." And though she never said it aloud, the truth was clear. She had moved on, leaving him to drown in the emptiness he once made her feel. As he sat alone, head buried in his hands, the irony settled in like a knife. She didn't destroy him. He destroyed himself. It started with a sound, faint, almost gentle, like someone whispering his name in the dark. At first he thought it was the wind, but when it came again, closer this time, his heart froze. "Ethan." The voice was soft, fragile, painfully familiar. He turned sharply, but the room was empty. The glow from his laptop flickered across the walls, casting ghostly shadows that seemed to move when he blinked. He rubbed his eyes, muttering to himself, "I need sleep." But deep down, he knew it wasn't exhaustion. It was guilt manifesting in form and sound. Every night the whispers returned, more insistent, more accusing. They came from the corners, from the mirrors, from the phone he couldn't stop checking. He tried to drown them out with music, but even the lyrics began twisting into her words, the ones he once dismissed, now echoing through his own conscience. And for the first time, Ethan wondered if he was losing his mind, or if someone wanted him to. One night, lightning flashed outside his apartment window, lighting up the room in stark white. And there, just for a moment, he saw her, standing in the corner, face half-shadowed, eyes wide and cold. He stumbled back, knocking over a lamp, breath shallow and shaking. The room went dark again, but her image burned in his mind like an after-image of regret. He whispered her name, barely audible. "Maya?" No response. Only silence thick enough to suffocate. He turned on all the lights, pacing, muttering that it wasn't real. Yet when he looked toward the window again, there was a faint outline, a handprint, small, delicate, unmistakably hers. He wiped it away, but it reappeared as soon as he blinked. That night, he didn't sleep. He just sat on the floor, clutching his knees, waiting for dawn, for proof that daylight could still save him from what his past had created. Days turned into a blur of caffeine, paranoia, and trembling hands. He started hearing her footsteps when no one was there. His phone would buzz, and when he looked, empty screen, no messages. But sometimes, a faint notification appeared just for a second. "Remember me?" His mind fractured slowly. He began talking to her picture, apologizing, pleading, begging for forgiveness she'd never asked for. "You were right," he'd whisper into the silence, tears streaking down his face. "You were always right." But no matter how much he repented, her voice never softened. It only grew colder, more distant, a reflection of the pain she once endured. One evening, when he looked into the mirror, he saw her again, standing right behind him, smiling. He turned instantly, but the room was empty. Only the sound of a heartbeat filled the air, and he couldn't tell if it was his or hers. As the lights flickered, Ethan realized something horrifying. It wasn't her haunting him. It was his own conscience wearing her face. The rain hadn't stopped for days. It fell hard against the windshield as Ethan drove through the night, his eyes hollow, his hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. The wipers struggled to clear the fog, but his vision was already clouded, not by rain, but by memory. He didn't even remember how he found her new address. Maybe he had searched for it during one of his sleepless nights, or maybe fate had simply pushed him toward her one last time. The road twisted through the hills, every turn echoing the chaos in his mind. He replayed her laughter, her tears, her silence, like a haunting film reel stuck on loop. His heart pounded as he whispered to himself, "She deserves to hear it. She needs to know I'm sorry." But another voice, darker, crueler, hissed back. "Or maybe you just want peace for yourself." As lightning cut through the sky, he saw the faint glow of her house ahead. His breath hitched. After all this time, he was finally there. He stood at her doorstep for what felt like hours. The sound of the rain was deafening, soaking through his clothes, but he couldn't bring himself to knock. Through the window, he could see her silhouette. Calm, composed, living a life untouched by the storm that raged inside him. When he finally raised his hand, it trembled. The first knock was barely audible. The second, louder. Moments later, the door opened, and there she was, Maya. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with quiet disbelief. Time had changed her. She carried an aura of peace, strength, and something else he couldn't name. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I had to see you." She said nothing, only watching him with that same unsettling calm. The silence stretched until it broke him. "I can't sleep, Maya. I can't breathe. I see you everywhere. I'm sorry." She tilted her head slightly, her tone soft but distant. "Are you sorry for what you did to me or for what it's done to you?" The question hit harder than any scream ever could. He fell to his knees on her doorstep, rain mixing with tears. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them. The man who broke and the woman who rebuilt. "I didn't know what I was doing," he whispered. "I thought I was in control. I thought I could hurt you and walk away. But it's like you're still here, inside me." Maya stepped closer, her voice steady. "I was never inside you, Ethan. It's your guilt that stayed. And it's not me haunting you. It's the version of yourself you can't escape." He looked up at her, searching for forgiveness, but found none. Only reflection. She didn't need revenge anymore. Her silence had become justice. After a long pause, she spoke again, softly. "You wanted me to feel small, but in trying to break me, you broke yourself." Then she closed the door, not with anger, but finality. He stood there for a long time, the echo of her words mixing with the rain. And in that moment, Ethan realized the truth. Some apologies don't heal wounds. They only prove how deep they were. When the door shut, it wasn't loud, it was soft, almost gentle, but it echoed through Ethan's chest like thunder. He stood there in the pouring rain, frozen, as if waiting for her to open it again. But she didn't. Not this time. The storm began to ease, but inside him the chaos only grew. The air smelled of wet earth and regret. His clothes clung to his body, heavy and cold, the same way his conscience clung to his thoughts. He stumbled back to his car, hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. The silence was deafening now. No music, no whispers, just the sound of rain dripping from the roof. For the first time in years, he felt completely invisible. He had come seeking forgiveness, but what he found was something far worse: acceptance of what he'd become. As the headlights cut through the misty darkness, his reflection in the mirror stared back, hollow eyes, a man undone by his own choices. And that's when he whispered to himself, trembling, "She doesn't need to forgive me. I need to forgive myself." He returned home just before dawn. The city was quiet, the streets glistening with the residue of rain. When he unlocked his door, the smell of stale air hit him. Loneliness had a scent, and he'd grown used to it. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar. The couch where they once laughed, the window where he used to watch her leave, the empty glass on the table. They all seemed like relics from a life he no longer recognized. He sat on the edge of his bed, running his fingers through his damp hair, eyes fixed on the faint outline of her old picture frame. He had taken it down months ago, but the square mark on the wall still remained, lighter than the rest, like a ghost's shadow. He thought of her words again. "It's not me haunting you. It's the version of yourself you can't escape." And for once, He didn't argue. Because she was right. He closed his eyes, whispering her name one last time, not in pain, not in anger, but in release. While Ethan unraveled, Maya sat by her window, watching the sunrise spill across her quiet street. The sky turned from gray to gold, washing away the traces of last night's storm. She didn't cry, didn't smile. She simply breathed. It wasn't joy she felt. It was freedom. The kind that comes not from revenge, but from letting go of something that once consumed you. She thought about the boy who had tried to break her, and the man who had come back to apologize. Both were strangers now. Her phone buzzed with new messages. Friends, work, laughter, life moving forward. She looked out again, whispering softly to herself, "It's over." And it truly was. Because in the end, revenge wasn't about making him suffer. It was about watching him realize that he was never her ending. The wind carried the scent of rain, and for the first time in years, it didn't remind her of him. It reminded her of peace. For a few days, Ethan convinced himself he was fine. He went to work, made small talk, even managed a laugh or two, but every smile felt borrowed, every word hollow. The silence that followed him home each night grew heavier, thicker, more suffocating. The whispers had faded, but the emptiness had a sound of its own, a low hum that never left his ears. One night, while pouring himself a drink, he noticed the glass trembling in his hand. His reflection in the kitchen window didn't move with him. It just stared, eyes dark, expression empty. He blinked and it was gone. But his pulse wouldn't slow. He pressed his hands against the counter, whispering, "She's gone. It's over." Yet deep down he knew the truth. She wasn't haunting him anymore. His guilt was. When he turned out the lights, the apartment didn't go dark. The shadows stayed, watching. Sleep became a stranger. Nights stretched into endless hours of pacing and murmuring, his mind looping through the same memories. Her face, her voice, that final door closing, it all played like a cruel lullaby. He stopped eating. He stopped working. The world outside no longer felt real, just static noise beyond the walls of his guilt. One night, unable to take it anymore, he pulled out his old phone. Scrolling through their messages, he stopped on one, years old, where she'd written, "You'll regret how you made me feel." He had laughed at it once. Now, reading it again under the dim glow of the screen, it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like prophecy. He typed back, "You were right." But just like before, he never sent it. Because somewhere inside, he feared she'd already heard it, not through a message, but through the collapse of the man she once loved. Then came the whisper again, faint, cruelly familiar. "Do you regret it now?" Ethan sat on the floor by his bed, surrounded by scattered pictures, torn letters, and empty bottles. His eyes were red, his hands shaking. Every sound in the apartment seemed alive. The creak of the floorboards, the ticking of the clock, the faint dripping of the sink. He looked up at the ceiling, whispering into the silence, "I'm sorry. Maya, I'm so sorry." But the silence didn't forgive. It pressed against him until it hurt. Then a strange calmness came over him, a hollow sort of peace. He smiled weakly, whispering, "Maybe now she can rest. Maybe now I can too." He stood, walked to the window, and opened it. The night air rushed in, cold, sharp, almost cleansing. Below, the city lights blinked like distant stars. He closed his eyes, letting the wind hit his face, and for a moment he swore he heard her voice again. Not angry, not sorrowful, just gone. He stepped back, sat down again, and whispered one last time, "It's never her haunting you. It's you." As the room fell silent, the shadows on the wall seemed to fade one by one, leaving only Ethan and the sound of the ticking clock. When sunlight crept through the blinds, it stung his eyes like fire. Ethan woke up on the floor, body stiff, mouth dry, head pounding. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then the smell of alcohol and the sight of torn photographs scattered around him brought everything back like a flood. He sat up slowly, his back against the wall. His eyes drifted toward the window, still open from the night before. The city outside was alive again, cars honking, children laughing, people walking, while inside his world remained silent. It was strange how life went on, even after a person had fallen apart. As he looked down at his shaking hands, he realized something had changed. The whispers were gone. The shadows gone too. The room wasn't haunted anymore. It was just empty. And for the first time in months, that emptiness didn't scare him. It almost felt like a beginning. Later that day, he forced himself to stand in front of the mirror, the same one he'd avoided for so long. His reflection stared back at him, unshaven, tired, eyes sunken, yet strangely calm. He didn't see the ghost of Maya anymore. He only saw himself, the man who had hurt, the man who had fallen, and the man who now had to live with it. He whispered, "You did this. No one else." His voice cracked, but there was strength in the truth. For months he had blamed ghosts, fate, even love itself, but never faced the simplest answer. It was him. He reached for a towel, wiped the mirror clean, and stood a little straighter. "You can't undo what's done," he said softly, "but you can stop it from defining you." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. But it was clarity, the first real thing he'd felt in a long time. That evening he walked outside for the first time in weeks. The air was cool, the smell of rain still lingering on the streets. People passed by without noticing him, and somehow that felt right. He wasn't a story in anyone's head anymore. He walked aimlessly until he reached a small cafe. Sitting there, he opened a notebook and began to write. Not a message to Maya, not an apology, but the truth of everything that had happened. Every mistake, every cruel word, every regret. He wrote until his hand hurt, until the pages were soaked with tears. When he was done, he didn't tear the pages apart. He closed the notebook, placed it on the table, and whispered, "This is where it ends." The guilt didn't vanish. It never would. But now, it had shape. A story, not a curse. And as he walked home beneath the fading light, he realized something he'd never understood before. Redemption doesn't come from being forgiven. It comes from finally seeing yourself for what you truly are, and choosing to be better anyway. Weeks passed. Maya's life had quietly settled into calm again. Early mornings, coffee on the balcony, laughter shared with friends who no longer whispered her name like a wound. The past had finally stopped chasing her. Until one gray afternoon when a small brown envelope appeared in her mailbox. There was no return address, just her name, written in shaky handwriting she almost didn't recognize. She stood there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly between her fingers. Part of her wanted to throw it away, pretend she never saw it. But curiosity, or perhaps closure, made her open it. Inside was a notebook. The first page held only a sentence written in uneven ink. "This isn't for forgiveness, it's for truth." Her heart skipped. As she flipped through the pages, she saw the story of his unraveling. Every lie he told, every moment of cruelty, every sleepless night that followed. The words bled guilt and pain, but beneath them, she saw something else too, the fragile outline of a man finally facing himself. She set the notebook down slowly, whispering, "You finally saw it, didn't you?" That night, Maya sat by her window reading his words by the soft glow of her lamp. Each page felt like a confession not meant to absolve, but to reveal, an unfiltered mirror of the man he had been. There were no excuses, no manipulations, no blame, just remorse. She could almost hear his voice as she read, trembling, uncertain but honest. And in that honesty, she found something she hadn't expected. Peace. Not for him, but for herself. Because the letter proved what she'd always hoped deep down. He knew what he had done. He had paid the price. She closed the notebook, running her hand gently over the cover. "We were both broken," she murmured, "but only one of us learned how to heal." Outside, rain began to fall, soft, rhythmic, cleansing. It wasn't the same storm that had once trapped her in pain. This rain sounded like forgiveness. Not for him, but for herself. The next morning, she walked to a nearby park. a place she used to visit when she was trying to forget. The air smelled fresh, and the trees shimmered with raindrops. She found a small wooden bench under a willow tree, placed the notebook on it, and whispered, "This is where it ends." For a moment she closed her eyes and smiled, not out of joy, but peace. The kind that comes from finally releasing something that has lived inside you for too long. As she stood up to leave, a breeze passed through the park, lifting a few of the notebook's pages, making them flutter like wings. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Walking away, she felt lighter. The past didn't follow her anymore. It stayed on that bench between those pages where it belonged. Because forgiveness isn't about erasing pain. It's about letting it stop defining you. Days turned into weeks, and no one heard from Ethan again. His apartment stayed dark, mail piled at the door, lights never switched on. The neighbors whispered. Some said he'd left town. Others said he'd been seen wandering near the cliffs outside the city, staring at the sea for hours before vanishing into the fog. The truth, however, was quieter than the rumors. The only thing he left behind was his phone, turned off, and a key sitting neatly on his kitchen counter. No note, no goodbye, just the faint scent of rain lingering in the air, as if he'd stepped out into a storm that never came back. No one knew if he was gone forever or just lost somewhere, trying to start over. But for Maya, that mystery was enough, because for her, his disappearance wasn't tragedy, it was closure. Some stories don't end with answers. They end with silence, and that's how healing begins. Weeks later, a young woman walking her dog found a small notebook on a park bench under a willow tree. The pages were soaked, edges curled, ink faded in some parts but still readable. She flipped through it, confusion turning into awe, then quiet sadness. It wasn't just a story. It was a confession, a life unraveled in ink. She didn't know who Maya or Ethan were, but the words felt hauntingly universal. Love, pride, guilt, and the cost of hurting someone who only ever wanted to be enough. The woman left the notebook there, unwilling to disturb its place. As she walked away, the pages fluttered again in the wind, the words of a broken man dancing under sunlight for the first time. Somewhere in that park, it felt as if two souls had finally stopped chasing each other. In time, the city forgot their names. New faces, new stories, new storms replaced the old ones. But sometimes, at night, when the rain would fall just right, Maya would look out her window and remember the boy who once said she wasn't his type, and how fate had turned his words into his undoing. She didn't hate him anymore. Pity maybe, but not hatred. Because in the end, he had given her something no apology ever could. The strength to rebuild herself without needing his validation. And maybe, wherever he was, he had finally found a quiet place to face his own reflection. No ghosts, no whispers, just truth. Their story didn't end in love. It ended in understanding, and that, more than revenge, more than closure, was the truest ending either of them could have found. They say revenge is best served cold, but sometimes it's served silently. No shouting, no payback, just peace. She never needed to ruin his life. She just needed to live hers, fully, fearlessly, and unapologetically. And as she walked away that final night, she realized something. The best kind of glow-up isn't about beauty or success. It's about no longer needing anyone's approval to feel enough. He remembered her for what he once said. But she remembered herself for what she became, and in the quiet distance between them, Karma smiled.